Welcome back to the Matchlock gun reading, and we are starting chapters 3 and 4. Here's chapter 3. It's called The Small Fields. In the morning it was clear, with the wind still blowing and the white clouds in the blue sky, moving softly above the Heidelbergs. The two cows, after Gertrude had milked them, lowed along the bank of the Hunger Kill, which had risen too high for them to cross. The land was sloping upward from the low stoop, and it was sopping wet, and the narrow road that led to the Palatine Road by the corner of Widow Van Alstein's brick house was a muddy brown brook. The bean vines, the leafless, holding only a few ungathered pods, were like damp skeletons of the garden. Gertrude looked northward as she came in with the milking pail, and the house seemed solitary in the abandoned world. She had had a restless night, and it was seldom that her husband had been away overnight. 3 times since they had been married, she could name each one, but those times it was business in Albany that had kept him away, settling the rent with Patroon Van Rensselaer, or looking up a slave for his mother. He had never stayed out before on militia duty. Before we continue, I want to remind you who Gertrude is. Gertrude is his wife, and remember, Albany is the capital of New York. Continuing, a line of smoke snatched from the chimney by the wind showed her that Edward was down and had freshened the fire. She thought quickly that with a son, it was not as if she were alone. There was Trudy also, of course, but Trudy was too young to notice things, and she wondered whether Teunis would get back that night. She wondered whether he had any more news of the French and the Indians. There never was any definite word of them until the raid was over. Not even when they had burned Schenectady in 1690 had any word of the raid reached Albany until Simon had ridden into town early the next morning. Simon is a new character, by the way. She felt afraid. Their fields were so small in all these woods. An Indian might walk onto the stoop before they were aware of his presence on the farm, and if they were indoors at the time, she made up her mind abruptly to keep outside as much as she could all day long. She didn't want the children to be frightened, so she talked to them all through breakfast of corn mush and milk about how the cows were frightened by the water. She was trying to encourage her children to be brave. Every now and then they could hear the distracted bellowing of 2 foolish animals striding up and down the shore of the Kill. As if they did not have grass enough on this side, it made the children laugh. The sound of the laughing children made the kitchen seem secure, and Gertrude laughed with them, merrily, until Edward asked whether he should take the butter over to grandmother. And Gertrude said no, suddenly and firmly, so that he stared at her for a long time, and she made a lame explanation of wanting him around the farm to help her with the wood. He said, "Grandmother will be angry if she doesn't get her butter, Mama." She can send Tom over to get it. Tom was the widow's head Negro. And Trudy asked, "Why haven't we any slaves, Mama?" And Gertrude explained that all the place really belonged to Eunice, so that grandmother's slaves actually were theirs. But as grandmother became so cross at the idea of leaving the brick house, they preferred to build their own house and live by themselves. Trudy said she wished to live in the big house. "Why don't you make Grandma live here then? One has to be nice to old people." "Anyone knows that," Edward said to Trudy. "Why don't we all take the butter over together, Mama?" "No, I'm not going to stay here, and so are you, Edward." And she acted flustered again. After a while, Edward asked, "Are the Indians in the woods, Mama?" "No, I don't think so. Papa would send us word if there were. There is nothing to be worried about, Edward." That's the end of chapter 3. A couple of things I want you to understand in the story is that in those times, slavery was very, very prominent. And so we hear some terms in the story that were geared toward these slaves and those slaves who worked for the white people of the story. And so it's a sad part of our history, but it's a true part of our history. Okay? Let's keep going. Here we go. This is chapter 4, and we're almost done, guys. You're doing fantastic. Keep listening. This one is called Indian Fires. Listen close. John rode down after lunch, carrying his musket in his hands. One more time, remember, a musket is like the Matchlock gun. He was balancing it on the withers of his bright bay horse. He called for Gertrude to come out, and she closed the door behind her so that the children looking through the window could not hear what was said. The sun was warmer now, and the wind was dying down, and the bay horse rested his hip, while a person by the name of Mendris talked down to their mother. She tilted her face up to him, looking young and small and worried. Teunis says to tell you everything is all right, but the French Indians are burning the upper settlements. People have been killed. They have sent a company from Albany to the flats, and the company will stop them all right. What are you doing, Gertrude? Teunis wanted to let you know that is all. I'm riding over to Van Epps and to my own place, but Teunis thinks maybe you had better go over to the big house. Mandaris looked down at her. He won't get back tonight either, probably. Tell him not to worry about us. We are fine. And he looked away from her as she squared her shoulders. Tell me, does he want anything? Mandaris shook his head. Yes, I forgot. He wants his schnapps in the wood flask. All right, she said. Doesn't he want any food or bread? He didn't say, but he could use some food. There are quite a lot of us. Just a minute. She flew into the house to get the schnapps. Get the big loaf of bread, Trudy, and you get the ham, the big one, at the end, Edward. In a moment, they had the food ready for Mandaris. He put the flask over his shoulder and the loaf in his bag and took the ham in his arm, and just like a baby, he said, grinning at the children, and they laughed soberly. They watched him clop up the road, leaving deep tracks in the mud, and Edward said, Mandaris does not ride like father. He is like a flour sack sitting on that horse. He looks so uncomfortable. You must not say such things about Mandaris. He's very kind. Trudy clapped her hands and said, the Indians don't wear breeches. She sang it. The Indians don't wear breeches. Oh, the Indians don't wear breeches. Until she was hushed up and was sullen and went around muttering something. I want to stop right there. You see what I do for you guys? I sing songs. Be grateful. Edward finally asked her what she said, and she answered in a deep voice. Bergum ap zoom. Remember, we learned that word yesterday. Bergum ap zoom. He looked up at the Spanish gun at once. It seemed like a cannon with the afternoon light shining through the window along the whole length of it. He thought they need not be afraid with that in the house. And Gertrude said, let us go out for a little walk. Where are we going? Oh, just going to get some air, and then we can get in the cows. And they went out, and to please Trudy, Mama allowed her to wear the old shawl. The old shawl that she looked like a comical dwarf woman with fat legs. The children chattered all the way along, and Gertrude had no trouble in leading them up the knoll beyond the garden. It was high. It was high rise of the ground. From the top of it, one could see out clear into the north and the east. The sun was halfway down, and the west wind, though it was much milder, was like a stream against their cheeks. The children saw the smoke as soon as Gertrude did. It was a leaning cloud far in the north, and they could see it plain against the pale horizon. It was far away, the children asked. Yes, Gertrude was straining her eyes. She tried to imagine where it came from. She thought it was much nearer than the north settlements. It was near the flats. She thought, since it showed so distinctly. It is a big fire, Mama. Yes, I think so. I want to see it, said Trudy. It's too far. It's time to be getting back to the house. Edward was silent. They walked down together, and the wind cold in their faces, and saw the cows by the creek. Come, cried Gertrude, we must get in them. I'll get them, said Edward. No, we'll all get them. Hurry. Trudy ran, waving a stick and screeching, Bergam ab Zoom! But Edward kept watching his mother. He knew now that she was afraid. Are the Indians near? Not very. She made her voice sound calm. Luckily, the cows were eager to be brought in. They fastened them and went into the house, and then Trudy was sent to wash her face, and Gertrude called Edward. She looked pale and serious. I think the Indians are quite near. Edward, you must not go out anymore. Why don't we go over to grandmother's? It's better here. She thought of an excuse not to go. If Papa comes back, he would want to find us at home, Edward. The end of chapter 4. So a couple of things in the story. Remember that Gertrude is the wife. And remember that I want to pronounce his name correctly. Let's see if I can find it. Ooh, let me find it. His name is Teunis. Can you say that with me? Teunis. That is the father. So Teunis is the father, Gertrude is the mother, and they are trying to find out where the Indians are and this whole thing. But remember, the main story is about that matchlock gun. Okay, it's also referred to as a musket. So remember those terms as you continue in your lesson for today. And, they were worried. They were trying to figure out what they were going to do. And our lesson today has a lot to do with that subject. Okay, so this has been chapter 3 and 4 of the Matchlock Gun. Enjoy and have fun working on the rest of your lesson for today. I'll talk to you soon.